Throughout history, some of the most captivating and impactful stories have emerged from the most unlikely places, behind the walls of a prison. In this documentary, we delve into the lives of 6 famous authors who, while incarcerated, defied their circumstances to create literary bestsellers. 5 authors who wrote bestsellers in prison. Voltaire. From an early age, Voltaire faced issues with the authorities due to his critiques of the government. Critics embraced his epic poem, La Henriade, but its satirical attack on politics and religion infuriated the government, and Voltaire was arrested in 1717. He spent nearly a year in the Bastille. Voltaire's time in prison failed to dry up his satirical pen. In 1726, he was forced to flee to England. One of his satirical verses, in which he accused the regent of committing incest with his daughter. Despite these setbacks, the Comédie Française had agreed to stage his debut play Oedipe in January 1717, and it premiered in mid-November 1718, just 7 months after his release. The play's immediate critical and financial success firmly established his reputation. Both the regent and King George I of Great Britain honored Voltaire with medals to show their appreciation. Miguel Cervantes, jailed in 1597 in royal prison of Seville, Spain, for deficits as naval quartermaster. Released after 3 months. While prison, he began Don Quixote. It's not exactly clear whether or not Miguel de Cervantes began working on his famous novel Don Quixote while in prison, but the prologue to the first part of the novel insists that it was begotten in a prison, where every discomfort has its place, and every sad sound makes its home. Regardless, Cervantes' novel doesn't depict the conditions of imprisonment, or even allude in most respects to social conditions, at least in realist terms. Instead, the novel begins with an introduction to the fanciful world of Don Quixote. John Bunyan. The religious tolerance that had previously allowed Bunyan the liberty to preach was significantly restricted after the monarchy was restored in 1660. The Bedford meeting congregation could no longer use St. John's Church, which they had been sharing with the Anglican community. In November of that year, Bunyan was preaching at Lower Samsell, a farm near Harlington, about 13 miles from Bedford, when he was alerted that there was a warrant for his arrest. Instead of fleeing, he chose to stay, leading to his arrest and appearance before Sir Francis Wingate, the local magistrate, at Harlington House. Bunyan was charged under the Religion Act of 1592, which criminalized attending any religious gathering outside the parish church with more than 5 non-family members. This crime carried a penalty of 3 months in prison, followed by banishment or execution if the person failed to promise not to reoffend. Although the act had been infrequently enforced, Bunyan's arrest likely stemmed from concerns that nonconformist gatherings might conceal conspiracies against the king, though Bunyan's meetings had no such political motives. The Act of Uniformity, mandating Anglican ordination for preachers and use of the revised Book of Common Prayer, would not be enforced until 1662, and the Act of Conventicles, outlawing religious assemblies of 5 or more outside the Church of England, was still a few years away in 1664. Bunyan's trial took place in January 1661 at the Bedford Quarter Sessions, presided over by John Cullinge, who later helped draft the Act of Uniformity. Held in custody since his arrest, Bunyan was charged with devilishly and perniciously avoiding church services and holding unlawful meetings and conventicles that supposedly disturbed the peace. He was sentenced to 3 months in prison, with the threat of transportation if he did not agree to attend the parish church and stop preaching by the end of this period. Bunyan refused to comply, which extended his imprisonment to a grueling 12 years, bringing significant hardship to his family. During his 12-year imprisonment in Bedford County Jail, located at the junction of High Street and Silver Street, Bunyan was occasionally granted temporary freedom, allowing him to attend the Bedford meeting and even preach, depending on the leniency of the jailers. His daughter Sarah was born while he was still in jail, while his son Joseph was born after his release in 1672. Bunyan had access to a Bible, John Fox's Book of Martyrs, and writing materials while incarcerated. He often shared his cell with other imprisoned preachers. It was in this prison that Bunyan wrote Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners and began work on the Pilgrim's Progress, along with several tracts that may have earned him some money. Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde's imprisonment began when Lord Alfred Douglas's father, the Marquis of Queensberry, unsuccessfully attempted to put an end to the relationship between his son and Wilde. Frustrated by his failure, Queensberry left a calling card at Wilde's club, inscribed with the words, "To Oscar Wilde posing as a sodomite." Ignoring the advice of others, Wilde decided to sue Queensberry for libel in early 1895. Wilde lost the case, and during the trial, testimony against him led to his own arrest and prosecution for homosexuality. The jury in the first trial was unable to reach a verdict, resulting in a second trial where Wilde was eventually convicted. The proceedings, later published in 1948 by H. Montgomery Hyde as Trials of Oscar Wilde, offer a captivating look into Wilde's arrogance, Queensberry's oddities, and the British public's satisfaction with the guilty verdict. In May 1895, Wilde was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor, much of which he served at Reading Jail. During his time at Reading Jail, nearing the end of his sentence, Wilde penned a long letter to Lord Alfred Douglas, now known as De Profundis. A significantly edited version of this letter was first published in 1905, with the full text only appearing in 1962, thanks to Rupert Hart Davis's comprehensive edition of Wilde's letters. Leigh Hunt was an English critic, poet, and essayist. He co-established The Examiner, a prominent intellectual publication promoting progressive ideas. Hunt was a key figure in the Hampstead Circle, which featured notable members like William Hazlitt and Charles Lamb, collectively known as the Hunt Circle. A companion of Byron, Keats, and Shelley, he was imprisoned in 1813 for libel after describing the future King George IV as a fat Adonis of 50. He spent 2 years in the Horsemonger Lane prison in London. During his incarceration, he published Feast of the Poets and continued to edit The Examiner.